This weekend, Matthew Vaughn's latest film, Argylle, drops in theaters. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 8 Matthew Vaughn films from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of all 8 Matthew Vaughn films, or at least as many as you have seen. My list is not the right list, just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, if you enjoy this type of content, I've done a bunch of other director rankings in the past. Tarantino, Scorsese, Spielberg's, Shyamalan, and many, many more. You can check those out in this playlist right up here when this video is done. And let's get started. Easily in last place for me, The Kingsman, The Golden Circle. This film was such a big disappointment for me because the first movie was so fresh and original, and this whole film felt like one gigantic big misfire where it was just a series of bad ideas executed with a lot of energy. And Matthew Vaughn still knows how to stage an action set piece, so there's still some fun action in it. It's a star-studded cast with a bunch of charismatic actors playing lively characters, so there's plenty of fun still to be had. Of course, it's fun to see Elton John beat some people up. So there are some superficially entertaining moments in the film, but so many major plot points just feels so ill-conceived, and it feels like they went in entirely the wrong direction. Where at the beginning of the film, they kill off virtually every surviving cast member from the previous film instantly, and in a way that's frustrating, not satisfying. Just it feels like you did all the characters dirty. And then they go to great lengths and spend a whole lot of screen time coming up with an excuse for how to bring Harry back, despite him actually dying in the previous movie. Likewise, they bring back Charlie, make him a major part of this film, even though no one remembered Charlie from the first film. He's just not interesting enough. And then the one that just seems so bizarre to me is that they promote the princess character who only existed in the previous film and was only memorable in the previous film for a raunchy sex joke that was just so extreme that it was like, whoa, you remember that line. But then they bring her back as a serious romantic interest that runs throughout the entire plot of the film, where we're meeting the parents, he's getting ready for learn how to properly go to royal meals and stuff like that. He's trying to navigate not cheating on her, but his responsibility to save people. And you're like, what on earth is going on? Why did you pick any of these directions? And what it leads to is a scenario where the movie kicks off with this big action set piece with a car chase. And then there's over an hour in the movie with no action because we're spending so much time on his love life and on Harry being brought back to life and being obsessed with butterflies. And so a movie that just didn't work for me. Every time I've rewatched it, I hope that maybe something will click. And every time I'm like, wow, this was such a misfire. And some of it's frustrating because like seeing Julianne Moore as a villain being weird and wacky, that's fun. Seeing Pedro Pascal right before he kind of took off and started appearing in everything, it's fun to see that. And it's actually kind of fun. Matthew Vaughn talked about when Pedro was cast. He was surprised.
Pedro couldn't believe it. He kept saying, "He's sure you're giving me the role?" I was like, "You've got it." He's like, "I never get the roles. I'm older now. It's never going to happen for me."
Which is very amusing in the year 2024, where he gets all of the roles. But so when it comes to this movie, there is some entertainment because Matthew Vaughn, the cast, all talented and entertaining. The script and the story do not work. Number 7, Stardust. And to be perfectly clear before some of you get mad at me, there's a big gap between Golden Circle, which I don't think works, and Stardust, which is a movie that I think works, but it's just not really for me. Even within the last 2 days, I had a conversation with someone where I was talking about how I was going to be watching the Matthew Vaughn films and watching Stardust for the first time. I watched it for the first time last night, and the person told me Stardust is their favorite movie of all time. I know many of you love this film for a variety of reasons. it was never one that I was really drawn to. That's why I never watched it until last night. The specific genre with witches and flying pirate ships and stuff, I don't know. I never felt drawn to it. Having now watched it, my big takeaway was I thought if they made this now, this would have made for a really good streaming TV show. Where if you adapted it now, it would be 8 to 10 episodes long, and each sequence in this movie would be fleshed out to be about 40 minutes long. Whereas in the movie that we got, it just felt like there were so many characters, so many locations, so much world building, so many different competing values and objectives and goals that everyone had, that it felt like we were like moving really quickly through so much lore and history to try and get to the plot points, because it's a movie, so you're having to condense it too much. And I feel it would have worked better in kind of a modern streaming TV show that just gives you a lot more time to build everything out more. Now, one of the things that's so much fun about this movie is just how star-studded it is, both in the obvious ways where at the time, obviously, Robert De Niro, Michelle Pfeiffer, these were big stars at the time. But then one of our leads is Charlie Cox, Daredevil. The guy that bullies Charlie Cox in the movie is Henry Cavill. Superman bullies Daredevil in this movie. And so there's just a lot of fun in kind of watching some of these people so early in their careers before they broke and became famous in a big, gigantic film with these big, gigantic legacy actors. I think for me, because it was kind of hopping around with a few too many plot lines that didn't come together till a little bit too long, I didn't feel like I started to like connect into it until the last 40% where the plot lines started to merge together, the characters started coming closer together, and I could latch onto a little bit more because we weren't hopping around between so many different places. And I thought there was a few things that were just tonally too far off for me. In particular, the ghosts, where it just felt like that element was from a different movie than everything else. So a movie that I didn't think was going to be for me, and then I watched it and went, I can see why a lot of people would really enjoy that, but it's not a film that I would naturally gravitate towards, while not having a ton of big criticisms of it. I just think it would have adapted better into a TV show than a movie. Number 6, Layer Cake. This is a very interesting film for me because it's been on my radar to watch it since it came out almost 20 years ago, and I've intended to watch it. I think I've kind of watched it in the past, but I didn't give it a proper watch until prepping for this video. And the reason it's been on my radar this whole time, if you don't know kind of Matthew Vaughn's history, he kind of started as the producer of Guy Ritchie's early films. So he produced Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels and Snatch. And those movies kind of exploded, got all this traction, got a lot of buzz, in particular for people that were my age back when they came out. And so I knew of him as the producer that showed up in the credits for Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Jump forward a few years, and he's putting out a movie in the same genre, British gangster film, but with a very different tone. And then the next year, the star of the movie, Daniel Craig, becomes James Bond. And so then it's another layer of like, oh, the new James Bond was in that film. But for whatever reason, I didn't end up giving it a proper watch until now. And so I think that might have even created certain expectations on the film that it wouldn't possibly be able to live up to. But the movie to me felt more like an interesting demo reel than necessarily a movie that I fully loved. And what I mean by that is it showed what Matthew Vaughn could do as a director, even with very limited resources. And then it was a demo reel to show that Daniel Craig could be a leading man. And many people have said and speculated that this is the film that essentially got him the James Bond role that, of course, will define his career. And it very much goes back to this film. Other interesting detail on the background of this one, it was developed as a Guy Ritchie film.
We developed Layer Cake for Guy.
Right.
And he decided not to direct it.
where Vaughn was working with the author of the book that was adapted into Layer Cake. Ritchie then turned it down. He didn't want to do it. Matthew Vaughn wasn't even thinking about directing. And then because the writer of the book had been writing the script with Vaughn, he's like, the writer was like, why don't you just do this?
I said, look, I've got bad news, Guy's not directing it. And Connolly was like, well, I've only met Guy once. I spent every day with you working on the script. You should do it. And I was like, I don't think that's going to happen.
You know the material. You get it. You know what you want to do with this. You should direct the film. Vaughn didn't even really want to become a director and kind of just stumbled into it on accident. And when he went into it, he like really intentionally didn't want to make a Guy Ritchie movie. And so he cut humor that was in the original script.
I combined a lot of characters into one and cut out some huge sections. And John wrote a lot of really, really funny stuff that, Guy would have kept in, but I didn't feel comfortable with. So I just stamped it all out.
Why were you so keen to cut the comedy out of the script?
Because I didn't want to make Lock, Stock 3.
Because it didn't feel true to him, because he didn't feel like that was his flavor, which is kind of amusing since that he's done so many lighthearted, big spectacle spy films since Layer Cake. Layer Cake is probably his most humorless film that he's done, and that was very intentional. But I also think that's maybe one of the reasons why it didn't connect with me quite as well as Snatch, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, is because it goes for a more serious vibe. It has kind of the layered storytelling of motives and twists, turns, and backstabbing, all the stuff that you get in those early Guy Ritchie films as well as The Gentleman. But it kind of takes the fun side out of it, and it plays it as a more serious story, more of a morality tale, without nothing to kind of add the flavor and spice to it. It's good, it works, but I don't think it stands out. It doesn't pop the way other Matthew Vaughn films do, or like the Guy Ritchie films that kind of led to this film did. And so that's kind of where it stands for me. Number 5, Argylle, the latest Matthew Vaughn film, and a movie with a very peculiar origin story where the movie is based off of a book by Ellie Conway. But Ellie Conway is not a real person. She's the character in the movie.
It's based on a book.
It is based on a book.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm confused by this because has this book been published yet?
It's coming out in January. Yes.
The author of the book, the name of that person,
Ellie Conway.
Ellie is also one of your principal characters in Argylle, the author within the story.
Correct.
So we don't know who wrote the original book that inspired the movie. Adding to that, the book itself is not this meta story that's in the movie at all. It's like a straight spy movie. And in interviews, Matthew Vaughn has said that Argylle the book is book 1. Argylle the movie is book 4.
And book 4, which is the movie's based around.
Okay.
You have to, listen, Mr. Lucas was clever enough to start Star Wars at episode 4, so why not us?
They're totally different. They're not the same thing at all. So a very fascinating origin story. As for me, I thought that this was a very silly but very fun film that is celebrating as well as sending up all of the spy movie tropes. It leans into them in such an excessive fashion, in such an over-the-top way, that it's just fun. It just wants to poke fun at itself. It's poking fun at things that previous Matthew Vaughn movies have done in just this extravagant fashion. But the movie's biggest asset is also its biggest liability, which is to say its excess. There's a little bit too much of everything. That's what makes it fun, but that's also what makes it go too far. It's too long. There's too many twists and turns. There's too many double crosses. There's just too much of everything. It can get too silly at times. And so it almost feels like everything would have been better if just a little bit more restraint. Like that excess is what makes it pop and entertaining, and that spirit that it just goes for it without fear of consequences. But there are consequences. Not everything works. Not every turn works. And so it's kind of a movie that exists in that space of being flawed, being very uneven, but also delivering a fun experience. For me, I felt it wasn't necessarily a great movie. It was a good movie, but it was a great date movie. Just a fun time to take my wife to, escape real life. It's got some action. It's got some humor. It's got romance in it, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. Bunch of movie stars with tons of charisma playing these lively characters in a movie that just wants to entertain and keep you guessing and on the edge of your seat where you don't know what's going to happen next because it keeps twisting and turning. And that's what I got from this one. Fourth, Kick-Ass. Feel like this is the movie where Matthew Vaughn really discovered his sweet spot. In a recent interview, he described it as
blockbusters with heart and a wink.
And the thing I feel like he's uniquely good at is making these genre films that both celebrate and send up the genres. He clearly loves superhero stories or later on spy movies, but he also wants to make fun of the tropes and lean into the tropes because he loves them, but find his own spin on them that does something different. Likewise, in this movie, it goes to great lengths to poke fun at the characters, to make fun of them, show the absurdity of their actions, but at the same time, make you care about the character, their journey that they're on, and have a certain earnestness to it at the same time. And that's a balancing act right there to be able to pull that off in a movie that can be so ridiculous, but still feels like it has just enough humanity in it. And then he, of course, applied the same formula to the Kingsman films. Now, while this movie was a success when it came out, it was profitable and well received, it also feels like a movie that was probably a few years too early because it's designed to be almost this dark counterbalance to mainstream comic book movies that 2 years after this movie came out got propelled to this whole other level when Avengers became this billion-dollar film and the MCU started to just absolutely dominate it at the box office. And you imagine if this movie had launched after Avengers, it would have played very differently because it is such a commentary on the genre itself while also loving the genre. It's darkly funny, and at times I think it can go a little bit too edgelord, where it kicks off and a guy's, our lead character's playing with himself. We got a suicide joke, and of course, just hit girl in general. This is intentionally pushing it to the edge, edginess for the sake of edginess, and I don't think some of that stuff always ages the best, but it's fun. It's a counterbalance to what Marvel or what the genre has become because of Marvel. And even the fact that it's not about this big, fantastic threat out there. It's about fighting local crime. That itself was refreshing. Rewatching this movie, that was the thing that stuck out to me. It's like, yeah, he's in his neighborhood just fighting local criminals. And that street level stuff feels fresh and new because we don't get enough of it from the big comic book franchises anymore because they've just blown everything up to gigantic scope and proportions in the multiverse and in space. And so this one, because it's dark, because it's a send-up, because it's so funny, because it's so edgy, it's just something different in a very crowded genre with a lot of movies designed for the broadest possible audience. And this one has a distinct flavor, a distinct voice coming from the director and coming from the original source material that just makes it stand out and be different. Also, it features both Quicksilvers as best friends. That would have played very different after Age of Ultron. Third, Kingsman: The Secret Service. Right out of the gate, this movie just feels so energetic and self-assured. Here, Matthew Vaughn applies the same kind of bag of tricks that he applied to the superhero genre with Kick-Ass, but this time to the spy genre. And for me, it worked even a little bit better. Some of that is probably because just a little bit of the edgelord stuff in Kick-Ass and that it involves children engaging those in activities doesn't sit great with middle-aged me. So Kingsman is able to get away with things that film can't get away with for me personally. But it's a film that managed to be just jam-packed with its own style while also fitting nicely into the spy genre, where this feels like a James Bond movie brought into the 21st century, cranked up to 11, and put through the very twisted, sick mind of Matthew Vaughn in very fun ways. Even to that point, one thing that stuck out to me as I've been kind of listening to different interviews from Matthew Vaughn from different phases in his career, one of the things that he talked about when making Layer Cake is how he didn't want it to be a violent film. He didn't want graphic violence in it. And he talked about how in making certain sequences, he intentionally didn't show the blood and the gore. And he talked about, Tarantino can do that. And I love watching it in Tarantino films, but I don't like that. I'm not that guy. And you see how he's kind of evolved as a filmmaker, and you watch Kingsman, and there's some very violent, very graphic things in this film. A big part of what just absolutely elevates this film is the casting. One of the big ones that stood out just from the trailers was Colin Firth in perfect, unlikely casting. On the one hand, him playing a dignified British gentleman, that is very much what he has always done. But the Matthew Vaughn version of that beats people up in a suit, shoots people in the head, and gets murdered and all sorts of violent stuff, that is not what Colin Firth is known for. And that's what made it so fun and interesting to see him brought into this world. Samuel L. Jackson is as charismatic and lively as ever in a part that in particular is just set up to let him just go wild and be himself in such a fun way. Of course, the big breakout from the film was Taron Egerton, who this was his star-making performance. Listening to all those interviews, it was interesting to hear the people that almost got the part.
I've heard that Boyega was close.
Boyega close, Daniel Kaluuya very close.
Really?
The chemistry between Kaluuya and Firth was unbelievable.
Just hearing that makes me go, oh, that's fascinating. Now I want to see those screen tests. What was that energy that they were bringing to this movie? And you can think about it and go, oh, I can immediately see what this movie kind of would have been like had they been the leads in this film. I think it does lose a little bit of steam during the training sequence. I don't think that's quite as exciting as the rest of the stuff in the film, but that's kind of my only real gripe in the film. Otherwise, it's stylized, it's interesting, it makes a mark, it makes you fall in love with these characters, you're interested in the world and the world building. It's filled with little lines that are memorable. So just a great addition to the spy genre. Our runner-up, The Kingsman. Before you start lighting me up in the comment section, I'm aware that this is a hot take, but I also firmly stand by it. Actually, when I went into this rewatch, I looked at my notes and I saw that I had The Kingsman above Kingsman. I was like, really? Am I really going to feel that way when I rewatch it? And the movie's reputation over the last several years since it came out hasn't been the best. So rewatched it, and I stand by my original opinion on the film that the prequel surpasses the original film. And I can understand why this movie would not work for a lot of people. It is a vast departure from what the first two films were. Matthew Vaughn, in interviews, even talked about how that was the most difficult thing about the film, is that it couldn't really be like the first two films. It had to build up to become like them through the course of the story. But for me, I loved the way that it was able to kind of mix the Kingsman style with a somber anti-war film. And they found the way to do it. It's anti-war without being anti-soldier. It's anti-war without being anti-service, without being anti-taking action and doing something. But it's like about valuing life. And it's very much a father-son story where it's about a father desperately trying to save his son from the horrors of war. And that to me was just compelling. That I was fully invested in that, the journey that our lead is on, and therefore the movie worked for me. I can see why for many it has tonal whiplash, because you go from the Rasputin dance fighting.
I'd probably say The Kingsman, actually, because that was a real balancing act, and of people really coming in expecting something totally in the Kingsman world, not getting that, and trying to actually, by the end we did try and dial it back a little bit.
Right.
To then very somber World War I trenches tragedy. there's a big jump there. And then you get into the third act of the film, and we're in Kingsman 100 years ago. I can see where you're coming from. For me, if I latch on to the central character's journey, that emotional arc, if I cared about the characters, then the other stuff, you don't really pay attention to visuals or tone. Like, you care so much about the characters. That's what matters most. And that's how this movie worked for me. It worked on an emotional level. It worked on a character level for me. This was much more a story I was invested in than even Eggsy's journey. Therefore, the movie's the one that moved me emotionally the most. Therefore, it's my favorite of the Kingsman. But in first place, X-Men First Class. And watching through all of Vaughn's films over the last month or so, it occurred to me that while I thoroughly enjoy the highly energetic Matthew Vaughn send-up projects, the two that are my favorite are the ones that are period pieces that tackle real-life events in the context of a comic book reality, where they're more serious, they're more somber, they're more emotional, but they're also distinctly comic book films. And in this case, X-Men First Class, I think, is easily the most underrated of the X-Men films, where it came out right after X-Men Origins Wolverine, which of course was not well received and had a new cast. We didn't have Wolverine. And so it didn't, make as big of a splash as some of those other ones. And then it was followed up by Days of Future Past, which of course is a time travel story, but has a little bit of that, what we now do is multiverse, where you have different generations and characters kind of crossing over with each other. And so that movie made the big splash, and we kind of forgot about X-Men First Class, where those characters were introduced. And I think that this is the better movie than Days of Future Past, where it's just a great little character study about two friends with very different upbringings that respect each other, that love each other, really. But because of their different past, it sets them on wildly different life journeys. They keep intersecting, but from very different perspectives. McAvoy and Fassbender are both fantastic as younger versions of the characters, and they make you really care. I mean, Fassbender in particular, because of the nature of his character's journey, is given so much great stuff to work with, of just being such a character driven by rage, and Charles is kind of able to bring the best out of him. But he's still so deeply broken. And there's so many fantastic sequences, whether his revenge quest against the Nazis at the beginning of the film, where he's just showing up at these places and they're all memorable sequences. The rage that causes him to try and grab a submarine and nearly drowns himself. And then, of course, at the end of the film, where he's finally getting his revenge on Sebastian for everything that he did, and he agrees with Sebastian. His plan is essentially to continue up what Sebastian was trying to do. But he can't forgive him. And so he kills him, and like using a little coin in such a memorable way, in such a horrifying way too. And that's what the movie does so well. The sequences stand out to you. You remember them because they matter to the characters. They're character-driven moments. They have emotional weight and significance. You care about the spectacle. You care about the outcomes because you care about the characters, and that spectacle, those outcomes, are the culmination of the journey of the entire film. And it's just kind of fun when you're watching a movie like this, that this is what propelled Fassbender and Jennifer Lawrence to the A-list. This is right here where they really were in a big, high-profile blockbuster that made everyone go, who's this person? Where do they come from? And finally, it also just has this distinct vibe and aesthetic to it, where clearly Matthew Vaughn is a big fan of spy movies, and so even kind of infuses that into this X-Men movie, where it's about recruiting the team and everything they're trying to do. It has this 60s Bond film aesthetic to a bunch of the cars and the facilities that they're in. And it feels cool. It feels interesting and different and like it was made by a director with a distinct vision, because it was. So for me, of all of his films, and he's made a bunch of movies that I think are very cool, very entertaining, this one comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, I've done a bunch of these director rankings: Tarantino, Scorsese, M. Night Shyamalan, Spielberg, and many, many more. You can check those out right over there in that playlist. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV way too much. Bye-bye.